Yeah, it's a big topic. So I just had the choice to choose some points I want to emphasize. And I think some things will be new for some of you and not new for others. But I try to just lay some general thoughts and insights, and so we can later in the discussion share, and you can also connect with your experiences, because as I see you look so from so many different, well, for me it's England, but I think you come from different places as well. So it might be very enriching also to hear the perspectives on you bring to that topic, because ecumenism is a big theme, and I think in every country, in every continent, it has developed in a very different way. The first step I want to make is just to have a little, to look at these pictures, which is partly the left ones in the left corner on the top is some bishops from Germany with an Orthodox leader. And you see there kind of the struggle or the intention to link between different denominations on the level also of doctrine and of liturgy. So that's a part of the ecumenical field to find out how to come closer on that level. Also on the right hand side, you see the Pope Francis with the same, I think it's the same or different. No, it's not the same leader, but he looks very similar from the Orthodox Church and another one of the Eastern churches. And with that, you already notice the big diversity ecumenism has. And I don't speak about interreligious dialogue today, so we won't go into that. We will stay within the Christian field, but even that it's a huge part, a huge field, and with a lot of diversity and differences. On the left-hand side down, you see a group that is doing ecumenical studies, which is more on the scientific level, where you kind of try in academical ways to find how to walk a path together. And the right-hand side is a very important field and part as well, which is a picture of the community of Thésée in France, which some of you might know, which is the first ecumenical community of religious life that was founded. I think in the meantime there is more. I think even in Scotland on the Isle of Iona, I think there's also a movement who's trying to live just from the base of the Christian faith beyond the barriers and frontiers of denominations. But first of all, we have to say they exist, and that's why I make a little step into history. And also in a very short way, I try to have a look how it all began. Because in the beginning, I would say, of course, there was Jesus, Jesus first, but then there was always diversity. There has been diversity in the church from the beginnings. Jesus sending the 12 apostles, and if you follow their path, they kind of build own little churches that already kind of emerge into the culture they arrive at. You have in India, I don't know if someone from India is among us, you have the community and the church of St. Thomas, who is said to have been arrived in Kerala, which in the very beginnings, there was also a very special rite and a very special kind of forming and understanding oneself as church. And then you have the first communities also of St. Paul, which of course in the European area, they stayed more connected together. There were 4 patriarchates that developed, which in the beginnings were kind of equal. They had the same rights and voices, and then of course they started to struggle who is the first, who was the first among them, which you would think, as Jesus said, don't struggle who is the first, serve one another. Well, as it happens, which is also a point I need to make, that the separations in the church have always been linked with political issues, political struggles. So it's very difficult to separate the church from politics. I think that would just simply not be true to say the church had been the church who developed by its own. It was always linked with the interests of the leaders of the parts. It started to grow. So there's one part I make a little. Yes. There you see on the left-hand side, I'm sorry, I only found a map in German, but I hope you can follow that you have here the four red places were the four patriarchates, which was Rome, which was Byzance, Constantinople, I think you say in English as well, Antiochia, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. And these were the four first big churches who still today you have you see then the blue line. The Catholic Church then in the end emerged from Rome, but the other four. It was the fifth, sorry, and the other four still remained as Orthodox churches. So in the early times, the 4th century already, we have the first big division between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches, which was kind of the first cut because Rome said, we are the ones, and it also is politically connected because when Constantine, the big emperor, acknowledged Christianity as the religion for all the Roman people, it was very powerful, and the church became powerful and could say, look at the other bishops there, we are the leaders. So of course we have on the one hand we have the Gospels where there's always Peter who was kind of named the first, but in the development of the church in the beginnings, the Roman church was one among the others, and later became more powerful. So there we have the first division, and I'm going back. And from these days, there have been different separations and different church traditions from the early Christianity. And another very big mark, of course, I jump now many centuries, I'm jumping them. And the next big cut or big separation was, of course, in the time of the Reformation in the 16th century with Martin Luther, which kind of touches my country. You see on the right side a map of Germany in the time after the Reformation, and you see the very different kind of denominations which emerged after the Reformation. When Luther started to say, I can't follow the church, I want to reform it. I don't acknowledge the Pope as the one who is kind of in charge of everything, and it needs to be more democratical. And from him, there were different other separations, which would be the Baptists and the we can't go into that, but you see that from that moment there was kind of a little explosion, and you suddenly have all Christian denominations, but many of them. So you have in this country already very separated, and from there it spread out into the other parts of Europe. And then, of course, with the missions overseas, it also came later on to the different parts of the world, with the missionaries very often, and also with the kind of leaders, political leaders who brought their religion. There was a saying which the one who is reigning would also define which religion you were born in. So this was another time where religion and politics were very much involved into one another. And there, then we also make a step to England, and also there I only found the German, the German graphic, but I think it's clear. You know that in England the denominations that now are kind of the biggest one, the Church of England, came with after the Reformation, after Luther, with another separation which came from King Henry VIII, who said, we can't also deepen into that history, but it had to do with him also wanting to be independent from the Catholic Church, also to be able to remarry, but not only about the marriage, but also about his power and independence. So in England, we had then the big separation between the Anglican and the Catholic Church. The Lutherans were also present, but most of the Protestant part of the English went later by, of course, also by the leader, the political leader, the king. They joined the Anglican Church. So now this is a development from 1985 to now, to 2012, which is not the absolutely newest, but you see kind of a development that very many people in England have no religion at all, which is the highest line you see that you're seeing there. And then the blue line is the Church of England, which goes down, which has lost members. And then you have the other Christians, which would be Lutheran or Baptist or other denominations or evangelical churches, who kind of in the green line stay quite the same, even have been growing a little bit. The Roman Catholic Church, which is a minority in England, as you probably know, stays with the red line, also kind of quite the same. It hasn't lost as many members as the Anglican Church. Which might be explained by the minority status, because if you're a minority, you are kind of, you know why you you are part of that religious group. And then there is in the pink line, or is it pink lila, the non-Christians, and then you have a gray line which say we don't say who we are, which is also kind of stable. The non-Christians have been which would be more than Muslims, which are people who have a religion, but they are probably Buddhist or Hindus or Muslims, which I was very surprised that it's kind of a very low percentage in the English culture. So that just to have a kind of an overview about the situation as it is. And I mean, different countries have very different developments at the moment, but I thought we try to focus a little bit on England. From that, I want to come to another historical landmark, I would say, which is the development of the Eucharmanical movement, which is a very interesting story, I find, because the starting point of Christians, after all what we have been seeing just right now, after all the separations, which of course went together with, you had the era of the confessional wars. You had kind of, it was politically motivated as well, but you had Sweden in the 30-year war kind of attacking Germany. The Swedish were the Protestants, the Austrian king was Catholic, and all the people who were just suffering between under this kind of very harsh separation. It was not allowed to marry someone from a different denomination, which I think for us today is very difficult to understand. But I also think in the Irish culture, and of course also politically connected with the separation to Northern Ireland, which would be the Protestant part, it was very hard to even have social bounds, and there were strong boundaries between the denominations. And why then came, or where came the motivation to found a ecumenical movement? Where did this come from? And the starting point was a world conference in Edinburgh, or I forgot to put the date, it was in 1910. Kind of 100 years ago, a bit more, a bit longer, and they had three goals. The first one was a common action regarding the mission, and this was kind of the starting point, or it's a little sparkle, the spark to enlighten the fire, because the experience was that all the different Christian churches went to Africa, for example, or in the era of the colonialism went to other countries, and the people there were saying, who is it? You believe in Jesus Christ, but then how do you not collaborate? And it was very, very difficult to make understandable why they were separated. And that was kind of a starting point, and I found that very interesting. Maybe I can share a little experience which I had myself, which made this very clear to me. I was living in Munich in the community of Verbund in that time, and we had a girl from China coming to live with us. She was studying law, and she just came for a year of master degree, and she moved into our flat. And it was very funny because she entered the chapel and then she saw the cross and she said, well, you know, I'm not baptized, but I have friends from I think it was a evangelical church, and they have been telling me about your faith. But then it was really impressive that for her, it was very difficult to understand why this group and the Catholic Church wouldn't go together. And even that the friends were very jealous. They were a bit afraid that she would she would join the Catholic Church, and they kind of even started to make her retire from us a little bit. And for me, it was a very strong experience to say, if we want to give witness to something that is very important to us, how can it be that for someone who is kind of coming close or having questions, that there would be kind of that way of working against each other. And for her, it didn't make it clear why Jesus would not just be the Jesus for everyone. Later, she went back and she wrote to me years later that she in the end got baptized in that evangelical church, which I find very nice because we all believe in one baptism. But that was for me the experience that I understood. It's really true to be for being a witness of your faith. It's for people who don't believe. It's they are not convinced if you don't stand together. And this was exactly the experience that was made in the beginning of the 20th century. And the other thing was then the decision that they wanted to be united in proclaiming Jesus Christ, that would be the message they could agree on above all ecclesial and other doctrinal questions. And then there was a third moment, which also was very important, the common service towards the world. They understood that if you are Christian, you want to serve the world, you want to make it grow, you want, and then we always also have to think that it was in an area at the edge of the First World War, where the world, I think maybe in a very similar way as today, felt very much at risk. So there were many needs. There was the industrialization, people unemployed, many changes. So in that world, it was very important that groups saw to stand together and to work for a common goal. That is also why until today, the ecumenical movement is very much in charge of questions like creation, environmental questions, and other things. And then the next big step in that ecumenical movement is the World Council of Churches, the WCC, that is located in Genf and was founded in Amsterdam. And you see that was after the end of World War II. It has 25 churches from 110 countries worldwide, treating topics like union, justice, and peace. It's the same idea to be able to work for a society of peace. The denominations need to work together, which is very difficult or also sad that the Catholic Church until today is not member of the World Council of Churches. They have been kind of coming close after the Second Vatican Council, but they never joined because they say, if we join, we accept the other as churches. But we say we are the only church of Jesus, and the others are the separation. So there again, we reach the core of the question of separation. So there are many kind of groups of the Catholic Church who work together there, but they are not officially part of the World Council of Churches. But the idea of the ecumenical movement, I think, has been adapted or has also been very much deepened in the Catholic teachings after the Second Vatican Council. Yeah, then I only touch another question which I think could be interesting on the way of searching for unity, which kind of ideas there are, how to join together. And so that's also, you see how there are already 4 different ways of approach, which makes it clear that it's not a way where we are at a moment where we can say there is a decision for one direction. which is exactly the problem. There are many kind of different ideas about how to unite. The first would be the model of full union of all churches, which would be possible only through relativizing doctrinal differences. It's kind of the idea that kind of all churches kind of accept each other in their difference, which is a very ideal concept, because there the core problem starts that, of course, the doctrinal main issues are the things that kind of also forge very much the identity of a community. Another one would be the model of reintegration, which is the Catholic model. The idea is that the other church could be very much culturally, spiritually, everything in every way different, but they accept that the Pope is the kind of head that, who is kind of the one uniting all the others. Which would be, that the other churches, the Protestant churches, for example, and also the Orthodox, accept the Pope as head of the one church, which the Orthodoxy is much more inclined to do so, but also still has another way of being together. So it's also not on the verge of already being decided. For the Protestant churches, it's of course, it's no way. Then there's another model, which is the model the Protestant churches live among each other, which is a model of conciliar unity. They would meet kind of in little assemblies, and then every church has a voice, and they would kind of try to democratically decide, come to general common decisions. And then is another model of unity in reconciled diversity, which is kind of also a very low one, which would be kind of accept diversities, but find a very non-committed way of union. This is just to make clear that there's different approaches, and then also every approach with a kind of a limit, because another kind of church or community would say we can't agree to that. So there are different ways in Ecumenical theology being discussed, but until now there has not been one way. So that's why I put on the title of the talk today, United and Separate, because the unitedness is just being the faith in Jesus Christ, is kind of also the will to work together, but the separation stays with it's historically grown. And I had one professor when I was studying who said it's just a spiritual separation. But I have the feeling that many of the churches wouldn't see it like that, because there's also kind of a power, part of power connected there, and also a part of really history and of understanding of church, as how they understand themselves as being church. I come to the more practical terms or questions, which is Emiliana said to me, it's about being gift and challenge ecumenism, or to talk about it. So I just touched two pastoral issues, pastoral questions, who are very much in the pastoral field, of course, discussed, which is the first is the one of Eucharistic communion, which of course is not only a pastoral question, it's also a question of how to understand church. Because the Catholic Church says in the Eucharist is also the image of what the Church should be, united in as one under the head of the Pope. But it's also a very practical question, because when a couple is getting married who comes from different denominations, of course there's the questions how they could be one if they both believe in Jesus Christ, how they could be one at the table of the Lord. And then there's, until now, I think I was reading lately that there's another discussion that it could be possible. Until now, it's in that sense not possible officially, but very often it's said if someone is coming to communion and asking for it, you wouldn't neglected. I don't know if you say so. The priest is not allowed to reject a person coming asking for communion, which is a part of canon law, even saying that. So very often it's kind of the pastoral solution, which is the single, it's one case, and in that case it is decided if this couple could share the Eucharist, or should share in the Eucharist. I found a quote, I have it written down, where a lady who is living in Finland, I think she's Catholic and her husband is Lutheran, and they don't, in their communities, it's very strictly the way that they wouldn't share communion, so they go to attend Mass one time in the Catholic and one time in the Lutheran service. And she says every time the Eucharist, and when she goes with her husband, passes by, it feels like Jesus passes by, in a sense that Jesus is just going and she can't reach him. So you see that for many people, this is a very existential and very also painful separation they are experiencing. I know other couples who say, no, that's kind of part of what it is, and it's kind of a sacrifice. I agree to, I do a kind of spiritual communion. So I think also that people are very different in their way of dealing with these questions. And another question is, well, it kind of is linked with it, I'm already mentioning, is the mixed marriages. How do you, I think 30 years ago, it was still, when you were Catholic, you had to vow, if you were marrying someone from another denomination, that you had to educate, you would educate your kids and your children in the Catholic way. Nowadays, it is said that you just have to say the one who is more kind of linked to faith, or is more into living their faith, that it is better to educate the children in the way where they could have a Christian socialization, where they could have an education. So there's many things, I think, after 40 years ago, it still used to be very, very different. So these is the things that are kind of more discussed in the pastoral field. And then there's another gift and challenge, which I think is kind of the common ground, which is the mission, where I feel very many moments, like in the moment of the Eucharmanical movement, when it kind of had this starting point, which I think where you see that things just pop up, and they are kind of, they are picked up by different denominations. And I just put out I picked up the Alpha course, where some years ago, I made a little formation in Alpha course, which I found very, very linked to the VOMD weekends in some way, in others not, where I found we were a group of people from very many different churches and groups. And we had kind of a formation in this Alpha course ideas, and I had the most funniest conversations, because for one hand we were very much into the same. We had the same wish and hope to be able to deliver faith, to live it out, to get to people, and on the other hand we had very different experiences. And I remember one guy saying, "Oh, it was so great when our church split up." And I asked him, why were you happy? Because in the Catholic sense of understanding faith, it's the worst thing that can happen, that you have a separation in your church. He said, no, because we were growing, and then we just founded another church. And I was laughing, because that for me was very much a symptom of how different, different Christian churches understand church. But at the same way, that could be the challenge, but the gift was, I think, really the involvement and engagement into the mission aspect. And another, which is it comes from England, so you must know more about it than me, maybe, the fresh expressions of church, which kind of in Germany are at the moment a big ecumenical link, where there are big congresses how to adapt it to different areas, which is I don't know if you know it, a movement who was trying to live the mission in to reach out to people who are not kind of linked to church already. and they would do little celebrations in or services in pubs, and they have very different kind of focuses. And they have the idea of kind of also forming, they call it new churches, but not in a sense of separation. I think the founder was Anglican, but they want also to kind of break through the old kind of structures of church and find new little living communities reaching out, which for me is also kind of one experience where I see that Ecumenism is kind of also in the field of mission nowadays, breaking through or forging new ways. So now I have talked quite a lot. My questions would be now for you first, if you have any questions, what you want to know from me, but then also maybe to share how your experiences maybe on the level of doctrine, maybe on the level of community, or on your personal levels from the places you come from. How do you experience the gift and challenge of ecumenism? And if you want to read more, I can send this to Emiliana if someone wants to read a bit more about it.
That was great. I really enjoyed that, and I've always found it interesting because how far do you feel we can go in ecumenism? Because at some level, it's to do with what individuals believe. And so do you think it's always to do with the sort of addressing the individual and trying to get them to move between them, or do you think it's possible to actually sort of unite some of these smaller churches into, maybe the Catholic faith or something like that?
It's a really good question, because I think on one hand, I think the personal level, or the level of just starting from the small grassroots, from the grassroots, I think first on the practical level, it's the only way. And I think there very often the differences are not so much felt, because there you very often, I don't know how you experience this. I also have to say, I speak from the German point of view, where after the big Reformation and the big wars and struggles, I think in the last century we've walked very much together. And I grew up very much used to having a Protestant and a Catholic church. And of course, as a Catholic in my area, I'm from Bavaria, we are the majority. Maybe that's also why for me it never has been a problem, because I was part of the majority, could also be. But for me it was kind of, I had, in kindergarten there would be an evangelical service for kids, and there would be a Catholic one. And I would know that they are a big difference, but it was not a problem. And then I see that very much in even in the area of society, it's very much needed that the churches or the Christian, like the ethics in the ethical field, that they work together. So I think maybe it's a question of personal knowing each other, and then the other question is what the focus is. Is it to serve the world, or is it to serve society, or is it to clarify like the details? Maybe it's also very subjective, but for me these things are also details, but of course it's also structural things. And on the way, of course, for the big church, it's very important to clarify the structures, to clarify. But I also maybe think in a area where many people don't know God at all, or Jesus at all, maybe it's more important to emphasize on the common ground, on the common goals. So that for me would be through projects and through persons. But I also know, I think if we look to Latin America, very often there's also much more difference between very strong Pentecostal churches who are very much kind of seem to be more aggressive, or so it's not just all peace and happy ecumenism. So it's I think there's also very different experiences about it. I mean, in my country, I think we are kind of appeased because we know we need to work together. So for me, it would be really very interesting also to, from where you come from, what's been your experience with different denominations? Is it normal? Is it strange? Do they exist?
For me, I think it's really the aggressive kind of leading here, because you constantly have like the Pentecostals, or let me say Protestants, always antagonizing the Catholic Church. Even I struggled a lot with it too, because I mean, it led to lots of questions, me asking. I attended a school that was highly Protestant, and it affected my way of thinking and so many others. And then it got to a point where I now had to start asking myself questions and helping myself and trying to really understand what the whole point was. And when I got to understand what the Catholic Church was about better, it now felt like I was trying to get people to become Catholics. But then I now realized that it was also causing some kind of war, and not real wars, but then why am I forcing them to become Catholics when they are living like good Christian lives and we all believe in God? And but to be honest, it's really something that still confuses me till now, and I'm still really struggling around it. But I've learned these days to not focus so much on denominations, and most times when I find friends or people who do not believe in God, to just find a way to tell them about God, not necessarily about trying to impose a particular denomination or whatever. And that's honestly what I think it should be, really. I don't know, just my thoughts and experiences. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's quite a difficult situation, isn't it? Because I mean, that's probably an understatement. But because I guess at some level, you want to work together to promote these values, or at least the core values. But that at the same time, if you sort of, I think this is what you said earlier about the Catholic Church, how they wouldn't, I can't remember what it was called, but they wouldn't sort of recognize the other churches, because to some degree it's kind of, it's almost making people be a bit lazy as to, if you recognize everything as the truth, then what need is there to sort of emphasize the value specific to your church? So I guess that's why maybe they hold that value, and it's how do you think hold that balance between promoting the good core values, the ethics you were saying, but also not becoming lazy and just sort of giving into all of that. What do you think about that?
I just had the image of a family where you are recognized as a family, but inside you have maybe a lot of struggles and and things, and that would be my ideal, maybe that that the different Christian people who believe in Jesus could recognize each other or could understand each other as family, but then that wouldn't take away that you say, no, I don't, I have a different opinion, and for me maybe this part it's very important that maybe how you understand the Eucharist, which is always kind of one of course one core issue also of and maybe that, and then you can struggle but you still feel as a family. But I know that's an ideal, because as we heard earlier, it's not I think also different denominations can be also very much different in their kind of openness towards others, where kind of the fundamentalism, for example, comes in. We have it in the Catholic Church as well. We have kind of very, very narrow-minded people. But then you have denominations who very much draw their identity from separation, from being different. And then, of course, it's very difficult to be a family with them if they don't want to. So yeah, maybe I'm more pronouncing my wishes and dreams, but of course I have to recognize that it's not that easy. But then there's also that I have a friend who's working in the Eucharmanical in the dioceses, and he says it's so funny because for the Protestants it's very often takes ages until they get to a decision, because they have to ask everyone. In the Catholic Church, it's much more easy. And then there's what is behind that is also that it's different cultures of communicating, different cultures of making decisions. So it's a really complex situation.
I quite like that, the analogy of the family there as well, because I think you're right. It's kind of, you could be one family, but you can still be to some degree divided. I mean, you're united as a family, but then within that, you have disagreements. And I think that is true for a lot of families. And I think what should and probably ought to be at the heart of it is love, I guess, right? Because that's the underlying message of all Christianity, I'd say. And when you love someone, I think you sort of want to have those conversations, don't you? You want to have those disagreements because you want to sort of reach the truth together, right? Be that if you have to change your opinion or they have to change their opinion, but you sort of want to try to work together. You don't necessarily want to, I think, be complacent with your friends and family who you hold dear, that if you think they're sort of following the wrong path, you want to have those dialogues. And I think so I quite like that message, because there is this united aspect, but then you want to have that continual sort of dialogue to try to help people further. So yeah, I like that.
I guess I can share on a personal level that I also have a similar kind of story to Maureen, who I have one side of my family that's Catholic and the other side is Protestant. So I've spent half of my life going to Protestant churches and half of my life going to Catholic churches. I've also learned to accept the value of both of them. And so in that sense, yeah, I'm kind of warmed to the idea of ecumenism. But also, interestingly, I was speaking to a missionary from the Philippines, Michael, and he told me that there's a document that says that the Catholic Church subsists in the Church of Christ, within the Church of Christ, which I find interesting, because it's that the Catholic Church is not the Church of Christ, but is a part of the Church of Christ. It subsists within this greater reality. And he asked me a very interesting question. He said, do you think that other denominations are the will of God or a lesser evil? And so I think the way we answer that question is actually how we would approach ecumenism, how we would approach mission even. So I think it's an important question, but one of the first splits of the church was a split between the West and the East. What would you say between that split? Is that also part of ecumenism, or?
So also a good question, because I think on one hand, I feel the ecumenism between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church nowadays, it's the easier part. Because there are many values who both recognize, and also there are many kind of rites from the East that kind of accepted the Roman primacy, and they live perfectly balanced among each other. In the town Eichstätt, where I'm teaching, we have a very special seminary which has people from the East, and those the Catholic seminarians live together with. It's not Orthodox, it's united denominations, but they have married, they have kids. So the seminarians live with seminarians who have their wives among them. And it's not a problem, because on the level of understanding the Eucharist, there's much closeness, and also of accepting the primacy of Rome. So that's just a sidetrack, but to see that I think nowadays that there's on one hand, on the doctrinal level, it's easier. on the cultural level, there's a lot different, big differences. And in the early times, I'm not an historian, so I can't really give totally. I don't have the proof to it, the scientific proof, but as I read it, it's a lot of power struggles, political struggles, who led to that. And then the way, of course, maybe the gospel saying that there's Peter, and Peter is the head of the church. So these two things linked together, a spiritual and a political part, that led to that separation, which I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know how it would have developed differently. Maybe never Europe would have become such a strong cultural power, kind of being so much. Maybe there wouldn't have been so much colonialism if from the beginning there would have been stronger diversity. I don't know. That's just a theory. I can't confirm it. But I think that nowadays that's not so much in the center of violent separations. Even if the people who go to Jerusalem very often say that you see very often that monks are beating each other, because in Jerusalem you have denominations on a very small place, all kind of trying to defeat their little corner, and then it's sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's sad. You notice how also the well, I think very much it also has to do if the other gives you space to be. But thank you for the mentioning of that concept of the Church of Christ, which I find very important, because the Church is always more than the thing that is realized in our times, in the concept of space and time.
I think he likened it to the sacraments. The sacraments are the visible manifestation of an invisible reality.
Yes.
And the invisible reality is always bigger than the visible manifestation. And
I think this helps a lot in to solve many of the problems we have. Anyone else has a different aspect or experience?
Well, I think, as Kathy said, I am coming from originally from Latin America, so I think not in my country, not in Mexico, but when I was in Central America, I really experienced these difficulties to have a dialogue with another Christian denomination. Was not easy for the Catholic Church to deal with other denominations. So because they were so strong in the way to act, not just to speak or to deliver some speeches, to act as well. So when I arrived here in England, I mean, first in Spain, but in Spain it's different situation. When I arrived here in England, I think for me it has been a journey to discover that the gift and the challenges as well to be in a country where we are minority, but also in a place where it's a possibility to dialogue, because I really have seen that possibility in the middle of of obviously of the differences and difficulties, but I do see that there is a desire of dialogue in different aspects, obviously also with, again, something that I think is helping me a lot is to know more and more the history of the place, in this case England, because I am here, so I can see also somehow the difficulties, where are coming from the difficulties, because what the Catholics have lived here. So obviously, because I am not from here, I need to understand and to know more that part of the history of the Catholic Church in England. So I think I am still in a journey. It's interesting because you gave me the class of Ecumenism in Loeche, so was obviously in a theoretical area. But when I arrived here, I saw the practice of that, no? in different ways. So I think I appreciate that here. I mean, sometimes perhaps it's difficult to see for people that are perhaps from here, but it's so different than other countries. I think it's the richness that we have in England related to that, no? The reach of each one of us, the variety is for me a gift, with a lot of challenges as well. But even in the chaplaincy, I am not in the meetings, but they have meetings with other denominations, and they work together. And that is a gift for me, to be honest, like be witnesses of that. So just to say, that experience.
Just to add on to that point, actually, I think you're quite right in a lot of ways. I think England's actually quite an interesting place for this kind of ecumenical kind of dialogue, because it's actually quite diverse in one hand. With the religious subsets which are in England, you have quite a few different diversities. You have the sort of Anglicans, which is still, as you've shown in your graph at the beginning, they're sort of on that decline to some degree, but you have those minorities of evangelical Christians, Protestants, and Methodists and Catholics, right? We're all sort of in this sort of more steady state. And I wonder if that's due to the decline of sort of religion in England, right? Just as an idea, England is sort of becoming more secular. And so I think it's a really interesting place for these ecumenical dialogues, because, you know, England is almost facing this issue of just having a religion. And so it's all the more important that, as you know, our individual minorities, we're coming together to try to, you know, defend our position as faith-based people. But then at the same time, you know, it'd be so much easier if you were united as a country, you know. I mean, it's nice to be able to find a Catholic church, I think, almost anywhere in England. Most towns will have a Catholic church, which is nice. But then they're not often, they're still not the majority in England. So yeah, I think England's a prime spot to be able to try out some of these maybe ecumenical strategies as like a little testing ground, you know, before globalizing. I don't know.
People from Germany, from the different dioceses, go to England for excursion of course, really to learn from the experience there, because we noticed that there's something that you have already developed.